Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dr. Doctor, the show where no topic is too hot or too cold. Whether it's politics, religion, relationships, entertainment, or everyday life, you will be hearing from the experts. This show is not for the faint of heart or the faint of mind. But if you want to be inspired, you have come to the right place. And now, prepare to be enlightened as we introduce the host of Dr. Doctor, Dr. Peter Tassi, and his close advisor, Dr. Fooch.
Hello and welcome to Dr. Doctor again. We have with us Junior today, so it's great to have Junior back. We're happy to have him here to talk about the next great mind in history. And our topic today is the great inventor, the greatest inventor of all time, many would say, Thomas Edison. Edison was born in 1847. He didn't talk until he was 4 years old. He had lots of problems in school, daydreamed, and his teachers said that he was mentally slow. So his mother pulled him out of school and taught him at home, and she taught him all day, every day, watched every move he made, and focused in on the discipline of science. So there was a devoted mother who did everything she could to prove to the system and to help her son that he was actually brilliant. He wasn't mentally slow. Like I said, she concentrated on science and Isaac Newton. At a very young age, he was studying Newton. And money was tight for the family. They didn't have really any money. And so Edison took a job with the telegraph system and the railroad, where he learned the telegraph system actually on the railroad, and there he sold newspapers and candy to make money. And he'd do that during the night, and then when he came home, he would work on his lab. At the age of 10, actually, Edison had his first laboratory. He went to his mother and he said, before he was working at the young age of 10, Mom, I'd like a lab. And she took everything she owned and sold it to buy Edison his lab. So that shows the kind of dedication that his mother had to him and the kind of drive that Edison had in him to start at a very young age doing these things. Now, Edison, he ended up getting married and had a number of children. His wife later died, and he got remarried. And I think that he had about 6 children, Edison. Now, while he worked in on the railroad, he was the person at a very young age to start his own newspaper, the Weekly Herald. And he printed it right on the railroad, right in one of the boxcars. He had his own printing and started the first newspaper ever printed on a train. He also had his own lab in that railroad on one of those boxcars. He set up his own lab, and that's actually how he got fired from the railroad. Was his lab blew up one day and set the train on fire, and they got rid of him. But he learned a lot of the telegraph system while he was on the railroad, and his first invention was not his first patent, but his first invention was the working on the telegraph system so it could send 4 signals at once instead of 1 or 2. So he's at a very young age, right away he's learning, he's inventing things at a very young age. The mind is brilliant. You could see when he was just a child, even though the kid never spoke till he was 4 years old. He did have a hearing problem that I think he got from one of the accidents or from the explosion of the lab. He developed a hearing problem. But this is his early life, the early life of Edison. And I want to ask Junior, Edison said that geniusness is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Junior, would you agree with that?
No, well, not quite. I mean, it has to be there to begin with. Obviously, he was smart to begin with. You could take anybody else, almost anybody else would in no way be able to come up with the stuff that Edison came up with. But I could see his point. The inspiration is important because you could be smart, but if you're not doing nothing or experimenting or trying nothing, what are you really going to accomplish? So you really need both. But, I mean, let's face it. He makes it sound like anybody who wants to work and thing is going to be able to. And that's not the case. We know that,
Yeah.
I mean, there's guys like Bill Gates. Bill Gates has both, and that's why he is where he is today. There's guys maybe even smarter than Bill Gates that are doing nothing. You never heard of them, and probably don't have, because they have no inspiration. You know what I mean? They have they won't work. They don't have the perspiration.
They won't work.
They won't apply themselves. A lot of people like that.
Yes.
But you need the original ability in the first place.
Yes.
And we don't really know Edison because he never really went to school. He wasn't tested.
Right.
So we really don't know what his IQ or what his thing would be in terms of, standardized tests. We know Bill Gates and all the guys in Silicon Valley, Wozniak, Steve Allen, Paul Allen, they all scored perfect on their SATs, especially the math part. So obviously it was there. Plus you combine that with the inspiration, the work ethic.
Yes.
So, even to say 50-50, I don't know if I agree with that. So I think it's probably maybe 90-10 the other way. You need the intelligence.
90% intelligence, 10% work.
I probably, you need that to begin with. What's the point of even trying to understand these things that these guys can understand that nobody can, because they are gifted.
Yes.
But it's the same old story. None of them want to admit it. I don't know if it's because they actually really believe that, or because it's so easy for them, they can't understand why we don't get it. Like our grade 13 calculus teacher, Mr. Schmedley. I mean, he was a genius. He wrote books on calculus and everything. He himself was a grade 9 dropout, apparently, taught himself.
Wow.
And they can't understand why we can't get it. It's like trying to, it'd be like us teaching a grade 1 class, and we don't understand why they can't get 1 + 1 is 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you know what I mean?
Yes.
Well, with them, they're so far ahead of everybody else, they can't figure, that's why I think they don't really like to, I think they honestly believe, I think Edison probably honestly believed that.
Yeah.
They don't realize how gifted they are. Because to them, it just comes natural.
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Interesting. Yeah.
It's like some people can speak 10 languages. They can pick it up at the drop of a hat. Somebody like myself could study for 100 years and I wouldn't be able to speak.
Exactly.
It just comes easy. So they think it's all perspiration and, very little inspiration. But I think it's heavily weighted the other way.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's what I believe.
Well, when you look at the magnitude of his invention, I mean, he had 1,093 U.S. patents. 1,093 U.S. patents. 2,332 worldwide patents. He invented 1,300 devices. And that's why he's considered the greatest inventor of all time.
Well, plus everything he did was practical. As opposed to, say, somebody like Einstein, these guys, or Stephen Hawking, it's all theoretical physics. And it's stuff that you don't really use nobody really uses, but it's brilliant. And, in Einstein's case, it led to the atomic bomb and stuff like that. But how much do you use these things? Whereas with Edison, everything he invented and everything he worked on was stuff we use today. Right. We use in everyday life. It's all basically almost all the modern electrical inventions.
Yeah.
Now, His was the primitive form, of course. Now it's all digital electronic.
Yes.
But he was actually, and we're talking 1870s, 1880s. That's really when all the modern technology started in its primitive stage. But you take the telegraph. You could only send one signal over the line.
Yeah.
Because it's an electric current, and you're sending a signal with that electric current. So you can only really send one signal. Now he did 4 using relays and this type of thing. He got it up to 4. But today we can do millions and billions because we have the transistor.
I see.
The transistor can change basically what he's doing with the telegraph, and you're doing with microphones. And you're changing the resistance in a circuit, and it's causing fluctuations in the electrical, and that vibration carries your voice or the sound wave. And basically, but you're doing it. For instance, a coil, you pick it up, open, close, maybe one time every second. With transistors, you could do 1,000,000 times a second. You could do 1,000,000,000 times a second. They could do 1,000,000,000,000. It's solid state. It doesn't move. It doesn't have moving parts. It won't burn out. So this is the difference. So his is really, but when you think about it, everything he invented, with the phonograph, the record player, he bettered the microphone. And as a matter of fact, the microphone they use in telephones, they used his up until the 1980s.
Wow.
He bettered, of course, Alexander Graham Bell and Meucci were the two considered who invented the telephone. But without Bell's bettering the system, it wouldn't have been nowhere near as practical. Right. And that stayed until the 1980s, if you can believe it.
Wow, that's amazing.
So the stuff, and of course the electric light, which when his first electric light, the filament only lasted a few minutes, and then he got it down where it lasted for years. Now it wasn't efficient like today.
Yeah.
It wasn't efficient like the LEDs, of course. But you have to understand, he was the first one to really make it practical.
Yes.
Because he wanted to generate electricity for houses and everything and sell his electricity. So put lights in houses to replace the old gas arc lights, which they had.
Yes.
They actually had gas feeds into buildings and used it for heating and lighting.
Yeah.
So Edison really wanted to modernize the world.
Yes.
He wanted to make everything electric.
Yeah.
So he invented the light, the incandescent light, so that he could, then generate power and sell it to customers in cities and places like this.
Right.
This was his vision, to have every house be electrified and powered. Yeah. Of course, now we just think of that as natural now.
Right.
In those days.
You take it for granted now.
So everything he got into, moving pictures, of course.
Motion pictures.
And the big thing him too was the electric car, which back in those days was not really practical. He was dealing with lead batteries, acid lead batteries, and then he went over to alkaline, and that they didn't have the lithium that we have today. So eventually they will be all electric in the next 50 years. So everything he started, it all came into fruition. The only thing he was wrong on was alternating current. He wanted to go DC. Yes. And the problem with DC is you can't...
Well, before we talk about that, I just want to go back for a second and say that there is a story that his mother was sick and the doctor had to operate on her. But it was at night. He says, we got to wait till tomorrow to operate, although it was an emergency operation. And because we need the sunlight, we need light. Gas light wasn't enough. So that kind of motivated him to invent the light bulb, the filament that would make a light bulb work for a long time. And so it seemed like Edison would run into problems, or he'd see a problem, and maybe this is why he was practical, and then driven to fix it.
Yeah, his whole thing was inventions. It was all the lab and tinkering with things.
Yes.
And he would better things, like the original light, like I say, the filament only lasted a few minutes.
Right.
In his labs, he had every single material, every piece of hair from every animal, and he developed the bamboo thing with the light and lasted a lot longer. He would put things in there. And it wasn't just electricity. He was into botany. When I went to his summer residence, he was growing plants and everything. They showed all his, when you licked the stamp and it would get sticky, that was his invention. He would grow plant. He was trying to make rubber, because with the First World War, he wanted the U.S. to be able to produce its own rubber, just for security reasons and everything. So he was inventing plants you could make rubber from for cars and stuff like that, so that we would be able to use. And it was widespread because most people think of him as strictly an electrical. He was basically mechanical and chemical also. Very heavy into botany and, using things from plants to be able to make stuff. He was so wide. It was like there wasn't enough time in the day because he had so many. Of course, X-rays, heavily involved in that.
Yes.
He actually, his assistant got cancer and died in his 30s, and Edison felt very bad because he was like the guinea pig for his experiments with the X-ray. But he did improve that dramatically. Like I say, when you think about the stuff that he did, it was the everyday practical stuff.
Yes.
People use all the time.
Yeah.
As opposed to, some theoretical physicist where, it's great and everything and that, but you don't use this stuff every day.
Right.
It's not. And Edison was like the I call him a blue collar scientist. Like dealing, you know what I mean? Into the grind, working with the nuts and bolts and putting things together.
Yes.
And it was just absolutely...
everything that was practical would make our lives better. Of course, the 1800s was the explosion in human history for inventions.
Especially that time, 1870s and 80s. Yeah. When you think about radio, car, just about everything.
Everything invented.
Even planes, the Wright brothers.
Yes.
I mean, just about everything that
is invented.
But of course, like I say, it was the precursor.
Yes.
It's like comparing the Wright planes to a Concorde, a jet today or something. It's the same with Edison. You know what I mean? People say, "Oh, it's so primitive." Yeah, but he was the first one to really get the ball rolling.
Yes.
And start this stuff.
And that's the difficult step, coming up with the first invention. Perfecting things, yes, is a challenge, but really the geniusness is in inventing that first, which he did. Now with the phone, they say that he was inventing the phone at the same time as Bell, but Bell beat him to the patent. But he did, and they say because of his hearing loss, that he bettered the sound on the phone. And for those of you listening today, you may hear the microphone cracking. We got a problem here, brand new microphone, probably from China. I bought it, so you got to expect that. But anyway, he didn't he better the sound so that you can hear each other on the telephone?
Yeah, that's what I said. Up until 1980, believe it or not, up until the 1980s, the transmitter you had in was basically his technology. He had this thing, he roasted the carbon. He made the carbon a little bit different, and he put these plates in there. Because he made it so that when you talk into the phone, you change the resistance of the carbon. Prior to him, they did it a little different. But Edison made it so that when you're talking into the phone, your voice, the waves, change the resistance. And he made it so that it basically changes the current more than the other system. And when you do that, it transmits clear. It's like, you have to think about it like the two string, the can and the two cans in the string in our day.
Right.
You talking to the can, that vibration goes through that string, and the guy on the other side, the tighter it is, the better, the more it will transmit. It was the same with him with the electric current and the resistance in the microphone. Basically, it's a microphone. You're talking into it, and he did it with plates and carbon, roasted carbon they call it. He actually made it better so that the voice, the waves of the voice would cause a greater change in resistance, therefore sending a clearer signal.
Interesting.
Across, and it's unbelievable when you think up until the 1980s we were using that, because most of the stuff he invented, by the 50s and 60s they started improving on it and changed, and like I say with the old relays and everything he's using for telegraph, it all went solid state, of course, with the transistor, invention of the transistor.
Right.
So to think that even in the 80s they were using Bell's invention for telephones, I mean, it's unbelievable.
That is unbelievable, yeah. Now let's move to he invents the modern, or the light bulb. He improves it so that it'll last a long time. He ends up lighting up New Jersey or somewhere to show the world, was phenomenal, like a miracle happened. Now, but to send that energy to lights, he used what's called direct current, where it goes directly from the generators to every house. He tore up all the roads in the city, put underground wires. I mean, the guy is just mind-boggling. But direct energy has its problems because the generators only transfer the electricity for about a mile. They start to lose as they travel along the lines, as I understand, they lose their current. Now then, at the same time, we've got Tesla, another one of the greatest minds in history, inventing with Westinghouse the alternative current, where it alternates and it can go for a farther length. So there's this big war, the war of the currents, they call it, between Tesla and Edison, between Edison's company and Westinghouse, as to which is better, alternative or direct current, to light the world up. What's the difference? But tell us about direct and alternative current, Junior.
Well, direct current you get like on a battery. It goes in one direction and one direction only, and it stays the same intensity. As long as you have the same voltage, you have a 12-volt battery, and you're lighting up, say, a bulb or anything, it will send the current through to the bulb and come back on the negative side. Well, engineers and electricians, they have sort of a different than scientists. Like, most people think it travels from negative to positive. They say it actually travels the other way around. I don't really know, but neither here nor there. It's traveling in one direction, and it's basically staying at the same intensity. So it doesn't alternate, it doesn't change in its nature. The current is, as long as the load is hooked up and it's the same load and the same voltage at the battery or the source, the generator,
right,
it will provide the same constant current.
Okay, but does that current is constant even though it starts to travel along?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But what happens is, as current travels along a wire,
right,
it starts to lose energy because the wire has some resistance in it. Now, in most cases, all your voltage is going to drop at the resistance. It's just the way it works.
I see.
Voltage travels through a wire, and it will drop its resistance. It will drop its load, its voltage, at the load. Most of it will drop at the load. Some is going to, because it drops where the resistance is, and the load is all the resistance. But wire has resistance too. Copper wire has resistance too. So what happens is, if you're going a long distance, by the time you get to the load, you might drop 110 volts at the load, but you've dropped 10 volts along the lines because it's a long distance. In other words, the resistance of the lines is 1/10 the resistance of the load. So you're dropping 10% on the line. That's no good. You don't want that. That drops efficiency.
Right.
You have to create more energy to drive that load now.
Nice.
So you need things closer. So there's not as much, it's not going through as much wire to get to the load. The further you go, now you have a problem. So you don't want to go too far with your loads with the direct current.
Right.
Now, with Edison, he had, like you say, in cities, he set up generating stations, but they had to be within a few blocks.
Yes.
To be practical, because by the time, if you're going to be miles away, by the time you get there, there's very little energy left because it's dropped its energy across the wire.
Right.
And there's only so much left for the load.
Right. So you got generating stations everywhere. That's the problem.
You basically have to have generating stations almost on every block.
Wow.
You might be able to go 2 blocks at the most.
Right.
So it's okay in some ways, but it's not really practical if you want to electrify a whole city.
Right.
Or country, for that matter.
Right. Right.
Then you have to go with alternating current.
Yes.
And here's the reason why. It's actually pretty simple.
Yes. Yeah, explain what Tesla came up with, alternating
With alternating current, it goes in one direction and then comes back in the other direction and changes 60 times per second. So it's actually changing course 60 times per second in an alternating current. But it does the same amount of work as the DC current. As long as it's the same voltage and the same load, it will perform the same. For things like light bulbs and resistive heaters, resistive loads, it's basically the same thing. You could use AC or DC. Motors are different. An AC motor has to work on AC and DC motor on DC. But basically, almost the same for resistive loads. But here's the difference. Here's why Tesla won, and Tesla in the end was right. Mind you, the electric, DC, even your cars and everything, it's well now they're going to an AC. It's complicated, but DC is a better motor because the horsepower is always there. With AC, you get induction and some other things, but I'm not going to get into that. But here's the reason why Tesla won over Edison. With AC current, you can transform it. And what does transform mean? Transform means I can take that current that's alternating at 60 times a second, and I can couple it with another coil that's not touching the coil where the current's going through, but it's in proximity to it. In other words, even though it's not touching the coil and it's not being connected directly to the current, because it's in proximity to that other coil, and because there's iron there and it's a conductor, etc., what I can do is, by putting more windings in it, is I can alter the voltage of that supply. In other words, if I add 10 times the amount of turns to the coil on the secondary, the one that's not touching,
Right.
and say there's 100 volts on the primary, I can get 1,000 volts on the secondary. How is that possible? Because the AC is changing. It's going in one direction. In other words, it's moving.
Right.
It's going in one direction, the other direction, and it's like a sine wave. It's going up, down, hits zero, down the other way, up. So now what's happening? When that current is moving back and forth,
Right.
it will induce into the other coil basically the same amount of energy. But the difference is, by putting more turns in the secondary coil, I can boost that voltage way up. In DC, you can't do that.
Nice.
If you were to take a coil in DC and put it, nothing would happen because the current's not moving. For induction, you need movement. You need a magnetic flux, you need movement, and then you need something to conduct it, like iron and copper. So DC, it cannot be transformed unless you keep opening and closing the circuit, which is impractical and no good.
Right.
AC, it's inherent. It's there.
Yes.
It constantly changes. So now I can transform that voltage, that's why they call it transform, from 100 to 1,000,000. Whereas DC, I can't. It's always 100.
Right.
Now, what's the advantage of transforming the voltage from 100 to 1,000,000? The advantage is the line drops we talked about, the resistance, they're a result of current. Current going through the wire now meets resistance. Because there's resistance in everything. Same as the wind when you drive, there's resistance. Current meets resistance in the wire. What happens when current meets resistance in the wire? It has to drop voltage to overcome that. Now, most of the voltage you want at the resistor, not on the wire. But if you have a lot of wire and a lot of current going through it, it's going to drop voltage. But guess what? If I change that current and make it 1,000 times less, it's going to drop 1,000 times less voltage. And I just did that by boosting it up to 1,000,000 volts. Or say 100,000 volts from 1,000. I just did that. Because what I did now is I altered the voltage in the current. Yes, I boost up the voltage 1,000 times, but I reduced the current to 1/1,000th. So now in that secondary circuit, in other words, I transformed the energy from more current to voltage. That's all I did. I didn't use it, I just transformed it. So now if I can do that, I can build a generating station miles and miles away I could generate at, say, 500 volts. I can boost it up at the generating station to 500,000, and I can send it hundreds of miles because the current is that much less now.
Right.
So I haven't transformed the energy. The energy is the same. Because in physics, it's always the same thing. Energy is energy. That's it.
Right.
So I haven't made more energy because that would be, that would be the holy grail. If we can make energy out of nothing,
Right.
we wouldn't have all this problem with, using carbon and everything in our free energy, right?
Yes.
No, you didn't get free energy. All you did was you transformed the energy from one of more current to one of more voltage. So now I transform that voltage at one. So think of the difference in the drops in the line. If I tried to do it with DC, there'd be nothing left. I would need to generate millions of volts at the generator, which you can't do and is dangerous. You want to just regard if it's AC or DC. You just want the generator. You only want 600 volts or whatever it is. Then you boost it up. They boost it up. This is what they do in every single jurisdiction in the world. They boost it up at the transforming station to a very high voltage and then send it out into the cities. Now, once you get into the cities, this is why you have those high hydro lines. Those are the big baby. They're like 500,000 volts. You see the big lines sometimes when you drive. And the wires are very far apart because there's a lot of pressure there. There's a lot of, That's why they have to be so high and so far apart because of the increase. Now, what happens once you reach the cities, they start dropping it down. Substations. They drop it down to about 14,000 volts. And then send it through the city. Now you'll notice in your street, if it's overhead wires still, everything's underground now, but the old system's overhead, you'll notice they look like garbage cans on poles. They're transformers.
Right.
They take it down to 12240 so you can use it in your house. It's safe. And now in that entire process, how much energy have you lost? Not much, about 6%.
I see.
Compared to Edison's where you have absolutely nothing. So AC won out because it can be transformed and it can be sent over long distances without losing energy.
Right. Now, Edison was so upset that Tesla created a better system that he kind of resorted to... they say this is his dark moment in history, where he became so determined to make his system win over the alternative energy, the direct current. So he started doing things like electrifying animals and elephants and dogs in public display to show that his current was less dangerous. And he wouldn't sell his light bulb to Westinghouse for their alternative current system. That's how upset that Edison got.
Well, he was a vegetarian. He didn't believe in eating meat, so I don't think he electrified the animals, but he was concerned because animals even today, squirrels will get caught in transformers and get killed. There are animals that do, even to this day, up on the wires and everything, they do get electrified. Right. But Edison would never actually electrify them. He didn't even eat meat. He didn't believe in harming animals. But he was concerned, as were other people at the time, that it was dangerous. And of course it's dangerous, but you overcome that. Right. With certain legislation and laws, and you make sure it's transformed in a safe way. Right. I would agree with you. This is his dark moment.
This is his dark.
This is the one thing.
He even invented the electric chair at request. But he did it more. He didn't agree in capital punishment, but he did it to prove that direct current is dangerous.
Well, he says, I never invented for the military, I never invented anything that would kill, only would protect.
Interesting.
So he wasn't into you know what I mean?
Yes.
He says everything was a defense, not offense with him. Right. I agree with that. I believe he was that kind of man. Yes. But it was his dark moment in terms that he was so he was a stubborn Scotchman when you get down to it. But the thing is, I agree that this is the one thing that I've read about Edison that I didn't particularly like was how he fought that AC and fought it. He was right on everything else.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Everything he did was for the good of humanity.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't believe the theologians' God, he did believe there was a force.
Yes.
You know, and I agree
Yeah.
100% with what he said on that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? He did agree there's a purpose. It's the difference between, is life totally meaningless or is there some meaning?
Right.
He believed there was a meaning. He believed there could be but he didn't believe, of course, the theologians. None of them do. And,
Yes.
but the thing is, I think this is the one thing where I read about him where I didn't particularly like.
I see.
And he was wrong on it.
Yeah, he was wrong. But, you know, it's amazing. I mean, he's not God. He's not perfect. So he's going to be wrong on something like all of us. But, yeah, he now, this is the thing I noticed with a lot of brilliant minds. A lot of them were vegetarians. A lot of them were all peace. They didn't, like Einstein, they didn't want to create anything that kills people. They didn't want to create anything for war. They were peace-driven. A lot of them were vegetarians. And the other thing I noticed about a lot of these brilliant minds like Edison is they're extremely positive. Like when he looked at what he created and he says if a light bulb can light for 40 minutes, it can light for 100 years. It's a positive statement. Like they're always the eternal optimist. When his lab caught fire, not the one on the train, but his big lab caught fire and was destroyed, he said this is a great thing because now, he said to his partners, all our mistakes have been burned and now we can start again. So do you notice that about these great thinkers, that they seem to be eternal optimists?
Yeah. And you hit it dead on. He'd always find a silver lining.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And you're right about these inventors and things. They're usually very pacifist.
Pacifist, yeah.
Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, Swedish chemist, he read a thing, I guess they wrote an obituary of him before he died.
Uh-huh.
And he said it wasn't very positive. So, because he invented dynamite.
Oh, right.
Now, his invention of dynamite was not made for wars and stuff like that. It was made for blasting so you could put railways up.
Yes.
But they used it,
Right.
Of course they used it for, dark means. And
Yes.
so what he ended up doing was he established the Nobel Prizes.
Yeah.
That's how they became about. He
Right.
wanted to donate to something that was positive.
Yes. And primarily peace-driven.
Peace.
No war.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's why you have the Nobel Peace Prize. And then they have the science prizes. And this has all started through him.
Right.
His philanthropy.
Right.
And most of these great minds, I think we're that way.
Now, I want to ask you another thing about Edison, because I think that, like we talked about in other podcasts, where people are so jealous of people that are brilliant and invent all these things. I've read a couple things, listened to a couple presentations where, they view Edison as, I mean, this is really ignorant, but I've read enough of it that I want to mention it, get your thoughts on it. That they mention Edison like, oh, he wasn't that brilliant. He stole a lot of people's ideas. He bought their patents and then he refined it a bit, but he didn't really invent it. And, like, I mean, how stupid can you be to think that when you look at some of the stuff, the hundreds of things he invented? But what is your... He definitely a good businessman. But
He was
what
an
is your
entrepreneur too.
He was an entrepreneur too, yeah.
My opinion is they say that about everybody.
Ah, right.
It doesn't matter who it is.
Yes.
And Bill Gates, I mean, I don't care for Bill Gates, but, I remember when I was in the trade talking with a guy, this was early on, talking about Bill Gates, and this guy was actually a computer guy.
Yeah.
Very smart and everything. We were talking, and I was explaining, telling him how brilliant we go, and he tried to tell me Bill Gates was just a businessman.
Yeah.
And I says, are you kidding? Bill Gates? He doesn't know anything. I mean, Bill Gates went to Harvard and he dropped out. And the professor at Harvard said of all the students he had, and you can imagine Harvard, it's the top school in the U.S.
Yeah.
The very top students. This professor, PhD, says he'd never met anybody, any student he ever had, anywhere near the aptitude in mathematics that Bill Gates had.
Is that right?
So it doesn't matter who it is.
No.
And we
You're gonna
see this with Trump in the States. It didn't matter
Trump,
how many.
Yeah.
And so this is not just going to be with Edison. It's going to be with everybody. They're always going to say he stole it. It wasn't his.
Right.
We invented that years before.
Right.
This is something you just have to put up with.
Yeah, you got to put up with these idiots. Yeah, and like you said with Trump in the States, it's so evident. The guy's so far ahead of everybody.
It doesn't matter what they do.
Doesn't matter how much
people.
good he does, how much he predicts things and institutes things that are unbelievable to create the greatest economy in the world. Oh no, he's this and that. Yeah. So this is just something we got to tolerate with.
Yeah, every single person in history
is jealousy driven.
Every single person.
Now, one thing I did find interesting is that, you know, I mean, he invented so many things, hundreds and hundreds of inventions and ideas. But we think of him with the light bulb. But one thing I found interesting is that he came up with this idea for concrete furniture.
He did. He was involved in concrete too.
Concrete furniture.
There's concrete companies named after him, Edison Concrete.
Yes, but the furniture, because he wanted it to be lighter, he made the mixture different, and it would break. The concrete would break. But what's interesting is, here's a guy, you know, sometimes in life we get one idea and it doesn't work out, and we give up. We say, I put so much money into that or so much effort, the hell with it, I'm not doing it no more. With Edison, it was like, okay, concrete furniture, it's not going to work, I'm moving on to something else, shut the company down onto another thing.
Well, that was his thing, his line was never give up.
Never.
And also,
is that right?
Yes, and also iron ore. He bettered iron ore. Like I say, it wasn't just the modern invention, the modern electrical stuff. He was into just about everything.
Everything.
Iron ore, like steel, concrete, botany, plants, rubber. I mean, it was just across the spectrum. And it's interesting because here's a guy who's had no scientific training.
No, he had no schooling.
He had a few months, then his mother took him out.
Yes.
And then when he was working in the thing, he'd go the odd time, but he wouldn't last.
Right.
Like the higher elementary and high school. He never stayed in school.
No.
Here's a guy who really never had any formal training at all.
Yes.
And it goes to show you. You know what I mean? I mean, he was basically homeschooled.
Right.
Which a lot of kids are today, too.
Yes. Yes.
But no formal training, and that's the part that's kind of mind-boggling, and that's why
it is.
I call him the blue-collar scientist.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like the mathematical formulas that he had to put together to know if something was going to work. Very complicated mathematics. Where'd that come from? How did he learn that?
That's the part that mind boggles me.
It's mind-boggling.
How
yes.
he had no formal training in mathematics and science.
Yeah.
And he came up with all these practical.
Yeah.
It just seemed like he was the practical scientist, the practical.
Yeah.
So much of their stuff is way beyond, and it's abstract, and with Edison, it was everything that was practical and everything we use. And to him, everything was an experiment.
Everything was yes.
And think about it. It's what we have today.
Yeah.
You know, the universities, and same as this COVID. I mean, now they're trying to work on vaccines. Right. Everything is an experiment with him.
Yes.
There's got to be a way, like you say, if we can burn a light bulb for 40 minutes, we can do it for 100 years.
Yes.
And he was always looking for that better way.
Yeah.
There's got to be a better material out there I can use.
Right.
It must have drove him nuts.
Yeah. Well, they say like a lot of these brilliant people, and you mentioned Trump, he's the same. He never slept really. He would take naps, but he couldn't sleep. You wonder if their mind just drives them crazy.
I think it is, and I think they first of all they think if they're sleeping they're wasting time.
Ah.
And,
interesting.
And PJ's Peter Patrick's friend there, the brilliant mathematician who passed away, he would wake up in the middle of the night, he told PJ, with these mathematical formulas. You know what I mean?
Wow.
He was a cryptologist, and he wrote like that code for protection for like your Visa cards.
The American military, Visa, and yes.
Vanstone.
Yeah.
And he would wake up in the middle of the night, Peter Patrick said, and he would come up with these brilliant... They actually say a lot of the time the mind is most creative is when you're sleeping.
Wow.
and you're dreaming. A
Wow.
lot of these guys came up with these things.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with music. If you listen to some of these musicians, like really high-end musicians,
Yes.
McCartney, these guys, they'll tell you a lot of times when there's the mind, when it's at rest like that and everything, is
Yes.
some of the most productive.
Interesting.
So that's why you're right. I think they just think sleeping is a waste of time.
Waste of time, yeah. Oh my. Well, this brings us to the conclusion of this talk today about the greatest inventor of all time, Thomas Edison. I want to thank Junior for joining us and enlightening us on the whole thing, electricity and Edison's life and inventions. And I encourage all of you to look up Edison. We cannot in this podcast talk about his hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 creations. You'd be astonished if you looked him up and realized, what? Edison made that? Edison invented that? He invented this? He invented a fire alarm? He invented... it's just mind-boggling. So listen, thank you for joining us again today. And join us again for the next podcast on the great minds of history. Have a great day and a great week.